Salutations, students of Sun Tzu. Automatic here with Automatic Games, bringing you the fourth and final installment of Through Mud and Blood. This episode, entitled Steel on Steel, and it's just another part of my overall Battlefield 1 series. As you can see, the sun has come up over Berlin Village, and off to our left there, a German tank column is entering the village. Now, this isn't the first time I've played this level. I'm just off the heels of playing it, but I recorded that, but the results were over an hour and 10 minutes long. Mostly because I kept getting out of the tank like I am here. As you probably know, every building in this village is enterable, as is the case with any level in the Battlefield 1 campaign or multiplayer. And I kind of got carried away with that, and in the end I thought, well, I'm not uploading a video of this length. So, brevity takes precedence here, and I'll try to keep this one a little shorter. A lot shorter. But nonetheless, I can't help but go on foot occasionally. Specifically, at this moment, what I want to do is engage this Mark V with this beast of an anti-tank rifle. The first anti-tank rifle, actually, the Mauser 1918 13.2 millimeter tank Gewehr. The T-Gewehr. Now, also, I want to find those Renaults, because I know there's two of them, and the last time I played, they came from this general direction, so hopefully I can at least spot one of them. There it is. Actually, there's both of them, over there in that farmyard, and they've come to a stop too. And we're going to go for compartmentalized damage. Yep, so we took out its starboard side cannon. Now we want to take out its tracks. That's success. So its port side cannon is kind of just facing a brick wall. And now it's time to, hopefully we can take out one of these before they fire up. I've hit one of them twice and it still hasn't fired up, so that's a good sign. But the Mauser Model 1918 tank Gewehr is, well, necessity is the mother of invention. And, certainly that's what brought about this anti-tank rifle. As you probably already know, the Germans uncharacteristically did not put a lot of stock into tanks in World War I. Oh, they're returning fire or field guns opening fire, either way, it's time to abandon this position. Of course, every single building in this game is destructible too, so it's an important thing to keep in mind. So it's back to the Black Bess, if at all possible. At least to the relative safety of that tank. And also last time I ended up driving directly through the village, which I'm going to avoid on this playthrough. But I guess throughout this series, Through Mud and Blood, I haven't really spoken a lot about the tanks. It kind of dawns on me I've spent more time talking about the battles themselves. So there's a lot of information to get out about the tanks. Let's see, we know that the Germans didn't really field very many of them. They signed a contract for 100 of those schnooks. But in the end, nice. In the end, they only really fielded 20 of them. So, I don't know how many of those 20 I've destroyed in this campaign alone, but I think we've taken out a quarter, maybe more, of the entire German tank force. Anyhow, I mean, you can kind of hold this number up against the estimated 7,700 tanks that the Allies produced and fielded. And God knows how many they ordered that were never manufactured. Here comes another captured tank. As I mentioned in the previous video, I mean, that's in good faith with the idea that in the First Battle of Cambrai, the Germans did capture a number of tanks. Although I would imagine that most of those were Mark IVs, not Mark Vs. Now, the first tank-on-tank battle would have been Villers Brettoneux. In fact, the second battle of Villers Brettoneux. And if you remember in the Amiens video, I quoted von Hindenburg, and he talked about the importance of the Germans taking Villers Brettoneux during the Kaiserschlaght, namely during Operation Michael. And the reason was because it overlooked the city of Amiens. But they never were able to accomplish that. But during the second battle, they pushed with quite a bit of infantry. And at the front of this infantry, spearheading it, was 3 Chnooks. And then from the Allied side comes 3 Mark IVs. So we're setting ourselves up for a contest of the tanks, 3 on 3. And you know that I had mentioned that I always thought that the Chinook was an inferior tank. I recently read, well actually since these, just before this video, and after the last video I did, I read an account that claimed that the Chinook was the best tank. This was in an encyclopedia of tanks. And certainly a statement like that is conjecture, and it's an opinion that I reject, which is also, I guess we'll call that counter-conjecture on my part. But I don't know. The A7V Chinook, this thing, all 20 of them, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, all 20 of them were hand-produced. That is to say, there was no standardization for them. They did have a big crew. They could carry up to 17 guys, and they did. And most of that crew was just pulled right out of the infantry. So you didn't have that training that every crewman of a British tank would receive. But yeah, I don't know. Let's put it to the test, shall we? Let's see how it is in practice. So we'll focus on the second battle of Villers Brettoneux. It's going to be late April 24th, that is, 1918, which is during Operation Michael, the Kaiserschlaght. And as I said, you know, 3 Chnooks versus 3 Mark IVs. But 2 of the Mark IVs are female. And what that means is they're really anti-infantry tanks. They don't have any of the 6-pound cannons. They just have Lewis machine guns. However, the lead tank is a male tank with its dual 6-pound cannons, one on each side, on the port side and on the starboard side. I'm sorry to use maritime terminology. On the right and left side, they have the 6-pound cannons. And that lead tank is commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Frank Mitchell. And the lead Chinook is commanded by 2nd Lieutenant Wilhelm Biltz. But 2nd Lieutenant Frank Mitchell, fortunately for us, he left an account of the battle. So I guess, spoiler alert, we know that he survives. But that doesn't mean his tank wins, right? So, yeah, let me share with you one of his quotes. It's a relatively long quote, but I believe in the last episode I didn't give you any quotes, so this will make up for that. And I quote, "Nearing the village of Kaiserschlaght, I saw to my astonishment that 2 female tanks were limping away to the rear. Both been hit by shells almost immediately on their arrival and had great holes in their sides. As the Lewis guns were useless against the heavy armor plate of the enemy, and their gaping sides no longer afforded them any defense against machine gun bullets, they had nothing to do but withdraw from action. We still were lucky enough to dodge the enemy shelling, although the twisting and turning once or twice almost brought us on top of our own trenches. Whilst we were ranging on the leading German tank, our own infantry were standing in their trenches watching the duel with tense interest, like spectators in the pit of a theater. Looking down on one occasion, I saw to my horror that we were going straight down into a trench full of men who, huddled together, were yelling at the top of their voices to attract our attention. A quick signal to the gearsman seated in the rear of the tank, and we turned swiftly, avoiding catastrophe by a second. Another raking broadside of armor-piercing bullets gave us our first casualty, a bullet passing through the fleshy part of both legs of the Lewis gunner at the rear after piercing the side of the tank. We had no time. full on more than a temporary dressing as he lay on the bleeding and groaning whilst the 6-pounder boomed over his head and the empty shell cases clattered all round him. The roar of our engine, the nerve-wracking rat-tat-tat of our machine guns blazing at the Boche infantry, the thunderous boom of the 6-pounders, all bottled up in that narrow space, filled our ears with tumult. Added to this, we were half stifled by the fumes of petrol and cordite. Again we turned and proceeded at a slower pace. The left gunner, registering carefully, hit the ground right in front of the Jerry tank. I took a risk. Stopped the tank for a moment. The pause was justified. A carefully aimed shot hit the turret of the German tank, bringing it to a standstill. Another roar and yet another white puff at the front of the tank denoted a second hit. Peering with swollen eyes through his narrow slit, the elated gunner shouted words of triumph that were drowned by the roaring of the engine. Then once more, with great deliberation, he aimed and hit for the third time. Through a loophole, I saw the tank heel over to one side, then a door opened and out ran the crew. We had knocked the monster out. Quickly, I signed to the machine gunner, and he poured volley after volley into the retreating figures. My nearest enemy being now out of action, I turned to look at the other two, who were coming forward slowly. As the German infantry was still advancing, the 6-pounder gunner sent round after round of case shot in their direction, which, scattering like the charge of a shotgun, spread havoc in their ranks. Now I thought, we shall not last very long. The two great tanks were creeping forward relentlessly. If they both concentrated their fire on us at once, we would be finished. We sprinkled the neighborhood of one of them with a few sighting shells, when, to my intense joy and amazement, I saw it go slowly backwards. Its companion did likewise, and in a few minutes they had both disappeared from sight, leaving our tank the sole possessor of the field. This situation, however gratifying, soon displayed numerous disadvantages. We were now the only thing above ground, and naturally the German artillery made savage efforts to wipe us off the map. End quote. And the three shells that hit the German tank, the result of that, 5 crew dead, several wounded. The rest, as Second Lieutenant Mitchell pointed out, they spilled out of the tank and were subject to machine gun fire at that point. But there you have it. What initiated as a 3-on-3 contest, it quickly whittled down to 1 Mark IV versus 3 Chnooks. Now perhaps this test is a little bit of a misnomer once you get past the one-on-one contest between Mitchell's Mark V and Biltz's Chnook, because you can see that the other 2 Chnooks are kind of like, oh damn, and they start to back away once they're receiving shell fire. So they don't give him that concentrated fire that he was so worried about. But nonetheless, there you have it. In fact, it almost boils down to a 3-on-1 contest, and the Mark IV wins the day and takes the field. Now, unfortunately, Second Lieutenant Mitchell's Mark IV was ultimately knocked out. He controlled the field for a little bit, and then a couple of Whippet tanks, Mark A Whippet tanks, they came up to his aid, and they pretty much did control the field, but they were undergoing artillery fire until finally the artillery scored a pretty good hit on the Mark IV, and he and his crew were pretty much done. But as you know, he survived to tell the tale. And the Whippet tank, I should also mention, they're not in Battlefield 1, and I do hope that we will see them with the DLC, although it's not an inherently French or Russian tank, and the DLC is going to be French or Russian, and that is a whole nother story, which I will vent on in a little bit. Frankly, the Triple Entente should have been the thrust of the game, and the American should be DLC. I know I quite literally just said that I would speak on that later, but I take it back. And all I really wanted to say about the Whippet is I wish it had been in the game. And maybe it will be, I don't know. Though I think that if we were going to see a tank with a French DLC, it would be the Shardy Assault tank. And with the Russians, it would probably be a T tank. One of these tanks. Mini tank. I forget what it's called, but it's unimportant. What's really important now is my tangent, right? Yeah, I feel like you should have been able to play as a combatant in one of the belligerent nations of the Triple Entente. And granted, you do get to see the war from the British perspective, and I appreciate that, but I strongly feel that we should have seen it from the Russian perspective. And moreover, for God's sakes, we should have been able to play a French soldier. After all, France is the focal point of this maelstrom, and they're fielding one of the two greatest land armies in the world of the time. And that's just my opinion, granted, but I can happily support it. Now, I think if you wanted to inject this sense of Americana to appeal to a US consumer base, short of the DLC, you could have explored a little further this idea of the 369th, of the Harlem Hellfighters. That soldier, the protagonist that you see in the hospital bed, like, well, judging from the music, like 10 years after the war, you could have, I don't know, shared more of his experiences. And imagine the hype you could have generated from his perspective of the United States DLC. Anyhow, it's water under the bridge, I say, is on top of a water tower. And you know, a notion that just kind of smacks of General Byng comes to mind. General Byng believed that to opine about or gripe about something that's already been implemented, something that's set in stone, thus irreversible, is nothing more than an exercise in futility. And he didn't really have time for that kind of stuff. And that whole idea really resonates with me now as I'm venting to my viewers. So I will cease and desist, as it were, as of this moment. But yeah, back on screen, it looks like the Black Bess is up against overwhelming odds, as seems to be expected with tank crewmen. You know, certainly Second Lieutenant Frank Mitchell would understand that. Once those female Mark IVs backed off, he was alone up against what, 3 A7Vs, A7V Chinooks. We're up against 2, but Mitchell hung in there, and famous tank commanders like Colonel Patton, ultimately General Patton, come to mind. You know, before the Battle of St. Mihiel, when Patton was issuing orders to his tankers, he said this quote, part of his orders, and I quote,
"You are left alone in the midst of the enemy. Keep shooting. Gun is disabled. Use your pistols and squash the enemy with your tracks. Remember that you are the first American tanks. You must establish the fact that American tanks do not surrender. As long as one tank is able to move, it must go forward. Its presence will save the lives of hundreds of infantry and kill many Germans. This is our big chance, what we have worked for. Make it worthwhile."
End quote. There's your Americana right there. And that's very Patton-esque, isn't it? And you know, in reality, Patton had a bit of a lisp. I don't know if you've actually ever heard genuine audio from Patton, but he had kind of a funny voice. Please forgive me, Patton. But I guess I was trying to conjure that whole George C. Scott Patton. One can't help themselves, really. George C. Scott's kind of a badass. Anyhow, it looks like we've wrapped up the mission here.
You did it, girl! Next stop, Camper.
And so it's onward to Cambrai.
Oh, no. Don't you go thinking you can drop dead on us now. I'm fine, boys. Just tired from all the fun. Come on now.
Show me the way to go. and I wanna go to bed.
You fucking right.
Little
Drink about an hour ago.
Oh, 2 roads. Which one do I take? No, that's too small. I'll take the bigger road. It really matters, right?
Artillery! Drive!
So, what do we do now, driver?
We walk.
More than 300 tanks took part in the Second Battle of Cambrai. The war ended 1 month later. I'm automatic, and I really can't express enough how grateful I am that you take the time to watch these videos. If you like this. Thanks again, and as usual, I'll talk to you soon, friends.